Okay, well, we are going to get started, and if I could ask everyone to mute your microphones while we're listening to the presentation. And then, as I mentioned before, if you would please type any questions that you have in the chat, and that way we can answer questions at the end. And if you would like to answer or ask a live question via video, just raise your hand at the end when we get to the Q&A section of the program. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Jessica Laura. I'm the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami University, and we're located in Oxford, Ohio. The mission of the Interfaith Center is to invite people from diverse secular, spiritual, and religious traditions to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and friendship. And we seek to unify people around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. So we're here tonight to talk with Dr. Will Tuttle about animal compassion, and we're going to be looking at it from the perspectives of different world religions. And we'll also be talking about the connections between animal agriculture and environmental health, among other things. So some of you may be familiar with Dr. Tuttle. He is a visionary author of the acclaimed bestseller, The World Peace Diet, which was published in 16 languages. And he's the recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award and the Empty Cages Prize. He's also the author of Your Inner Islands on Developing Intuition, as well as editor of 2 other books, Circles of Compassion on the Interconnection of Social Justice Issues, and Buddhism and Veganism on the Connection between Animal Liberation and Spiritual Awakening. He is a frequent radio, television, and online presenter and has created several wellness and advocacy training programs. Featured in Cowspiracy and other documentary films, he's the co-founder of the worldwide Prayer Circle for Animals. He's a former Zen Buddhist monk with a PhD from UC Berkeley that focused on educating intuition. Dr. Tuttle is also a noted composer and pianist. Since 1985, Dr. Tuttle's delivered 4,000 plus live audience presentations promoting compassion and intuition in over 50 countries worldwide and in all 50 states. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Will Tuttle. Thank you for being here.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Jessica. Thanks everyone for joining in. And I'm assuming that you can all hear me okay. And we're speaking to you. And I think there's also a live stream as well, as there'll be people listening later. So I just want to reiterate that if you have any questions as we're going along, feel free to write them down in the chat, or you can ask at the end. I'm not planning on a super long presentation, maybe, let's see, probably 35 to 40 minutes or so. Just talks about some of the main ideas that I think really are essential for us to be aware of, especially today with all the challenges that we're facing. So the underlying idea, I guess, essentially is that all of us have been born into a society where we've been basically raised by the rituals in our society to view animals, certain animals especially, as commodities, as objects, as pieces of matter, basically, just as things. Like we buy and sell cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, and most fishes and so forth, as we would sell rocks or cement or anything else, just sell them by the pound, like they're just things. And that has a profound effect on them. Obviously, it's devastating to their health and well-being. But I think it's important for us to understand the effect that it has on us as well, because it's a system that, unfortunately, by forcing us to participate in viewing them as mere commodities, we disconnect from our natural sensitivity. And so, as Jessica was saying, I've written a book called The World Peace Diet. I've traveled the world. I mean, I've been to over 50 different countries all over Asia and the Middle East and Africa and Eastern Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, lecturing and speaking and meeting people and going to all kinds of different animal agriculture operations as well as farm sanctuaries. And I've lectured in all 50 US states. You know, I lived actually for 18 years in an RV, traveling all over North America, living on the road. So I finally recently got a house, but my wife Madeline and I, she's from Switzerland, she's an artist. I'm a musician, but I'm also an educator and taught college courses for quite a few years. And as we heard earlier, I was a former Zen Buddhist monk, and I used to teach college courses in comparative religion. So I've been very interested in diving into and understanding the world's religions and traveling and seeing what's actually happening out there on this beautiful planet. And the basic thing is that the main thing we human beings are doing, we don't realize it, but I think if someone landed from outer space and just kind of looked around for a while and then radioed back up to the mothership, that what are they doing down there on that planet Earth? They would say, well, the main thing, there's like one species, the human beings, and they're killing and enslaving billions of other species, and that's the main thing they're doing. That's the main thing happening on planet Earth. It doesn't seem to us like that's the main thing, because we have our lives and we're busy and we stop by McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken or Burger King and pick up some lunch or whatever. We don't think too much about our food and where it comes from. But the basic fact is that by far the most land, the most resources, everything goes to food, and it's extremely wasteful. So it's environmentally devastating to engage in animal agriculture. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But the point I want to make here essentially is that it's not healthy for our psychology and our spirituality. And that is something that's been covered up in our society a lot. But I think it's really a tremendous adventure of self-discovery to actually look deeply into the core of our society. So that's what I'd like to invite everybody to do here today, is just take about 30 minutes and just look, and I think actually look deeply into our own society. And I think it's the greatest adventure we can go on for self-discovery. There was a saying over the temple at Delphi in ancient Greece. The saying was Gnathi Sutan. That means know thyself. And in many ways, that is a religious and spiritual calling, I think, for a human being to really understand ourselves. It's important for us to realize that our human life on this earth is relatively short. We're just here for a few decades, and the time is ticking all the time, and we're all going to leave, no matter who we are, what we've accomplished, how much we don't want to go, whatever, it doesn't matter. We're all going to leave. We're all going to leave our bodies behind. And so in the short time that we're here, how do we spend our time? What is our purpose? What are our priorities? And I think the big problem in our society, in essence, in many ways, is that we are distracted from really focusing on the deeper issues of life and the purpose that we have for the short amount of years we're here. How can we actually use them in a worthwhile way and fulfill the unique purpose and destiny that we have for this lifetime? So the thing about animal agriculture is that it divorces us or violently separates us from our inner wisdom. And I think that's the main wound. It's really the main wound that we all experience by being born into this world. As soon as we're born, like I'll give my own story just briefly, just to give you an example. But the underlying idea is anthropologists understand that every society does the same thing. Every society tries to replicate itself, right? They want to continue the same society from generation to generation. So every society has rituals and other institutions the parents teach their children, and it kind of goes down through the generations. So the main way any society transmits its norms and values and so forth from generation to generation is through the rituals of that society. And the main ritual in every society is food. When you're sitting down and eating food, you're not just eating food. You're eating of the entire worldview of that society. So looking deeply into food is an adventure of looking deeply into the heart and soul, not only of our society, but into our own indoctrination. Indoctrination isn't a bad thing. It's unavoidable. We learn, their language becomes my language. Their food becomes my food. Their religion becomes my religion. Their philosophy and way of life becomes my philosophy and way of life. This is what we're like little sponges when we land here. We just soak everything up amazingly well. So at a certain point in our life, hopefully we get old enough and aware enough that we want to understand the programming we've gone through so that we can understand ourselves and then also understand the deeper meaning of life and not merely be a programmed automaton just following orders that were injected into us by perhaps well-meaning people. Because if that's all we are, then where is the unique being that we are? Where is the spiritual guidance? And I think that's the main thing in spirituality. Spirituality is essentially awakening to an inner guidance system that transcends the program of our society, whatever that is. The program of our society may be good, we don't know. It's hard to say. But if we're just merely doing what we've been told and taught, and that's it, and just having the same ambitions that we were taught to have and living the same way we were taught to live, then how is our society ever going to evolve and grow? And how are we going to create and fulfill the creative mandate that we have as a human being? So looking into food is an amazing adventure of self-discovery. So I want to just say a few words about that. Maybe first I'll talk, I mentioned my own story briefly. So I was born into Concord, Massachusetts back in the early 1950s. So Concord is kind of well known for being the birthplace of the American Revolution. We had the Old North Bridge and the beginning of the Revolutionary War and sort of starting a movement for freedom. And my father was very involved in that, and he was a Minuteman, and we used to reenact that every year. So I have that, I guess, in my bones, this kind of feeling of it's a good idea to have a revolution if things aren't going well, change things. It's a healthy thing to do. If you have an oppressive, tyrannical system, don't operate under that. Be free. Freedom is precious, really. And then the second revolution in Concord was the Transcendentalist Revolution, which wasn't really a revolution, but it was actually a powerful movement, which was people in Concord like Thoreau and Emerson and Alcott and all these people were bringing in the teachings from Asia, from Buddhism and Taoism and Hinduism and Vedanta and the Bhagavad Gita and all these Eastern teachings into the West and integrating it in some ways into Christianity and Judaism and seeing the connections and the similarities and differences. And there was a time of sort of awakening to another way of looking at the world based on Eastern philosophy and thought, based on a more meditative approach, perhaps, to life, more introspective. And so I was born into that, but I remember, and my father owned a whole chain of newspapers. I was born into journalism, and I was born into the swirl of questioning everything politically and all that stuff. So I have this at a deep level, but the food was a typical food. We ate lots of meat, dairy products, and eggs. And when I was about 7 years old, I remember asking my mother about it. I said, Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats? And she said, you mean everybody in the world? And I said, yeah. I mean, are they all eating like we're eating? And my mother said, yeah, pretty much. This what we're eating is pretty normal food for human beings. It's pretty much what everybody eats, as far as I know. And then she left, and and I thanked her, and then she came back and she said, well, that's not completely true. There are vegetarians. And I'd never heard that word in my life. And I was at that age when I liked learning a new word, especially a big word like vegetarian. Wow. What's a vegetarian? And my mother thought for a minute, and then she said, you don't need to worry about it. You're never going to meet one. And she said, I've never met one. I don't know where they get their protein. So I had this image in my young mind of these extremely rare people, because in my mind, my mother was extremely old and she had never met one. And I didn't know where they, got their protein. So they were probably extremely sick, weakly, pathetic people dragging themselves through the dirt, begging for protein. So I was just so glad that we were not vegetarians and I was saved from that terrible fate. And as I grew up, of course, I kept eating lots of meat, dairy, and eggs. And I was just basically eating whatever my parents and teachers and friends and neighbors and the minister and everybody was eating. We all ate the same thing. There was no way to question that at all. When I was a little bit older in my early teens, I remember going away to a summer camp in Vermont that was affiliated with this beautiful organic dairy and a farm and so forth. And we would learn to kill our own animals. So I participated in that. And so I remember holding down the chicken with one hand and having my axe and cutting her head off with my other hand and putting her through the scalding tank. And then we ate the chickens and we learned, all about uh, life on the farm, and this is what you got to do, and the narrative, right? I learned, the basic thing was God gave us these animals to eat. They don't have a soul. They taste good. If you don't eat them, you're definitely going to die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. You just got, this is what you got to do. This is how it's set up, right? And even every year we would also choose one of the dairy cows. We would put a gun to her head and we would pull the trigger, and it was quite painful to watch that because it took quite a few bullets usually to finally bring her down, and a lot of suffering and a lot of blood and everything, misery and feces and urine just gushing everywhere. So it was really eye-opening, but I never questioned the ethics of it or the rightness of it or the necessity of it. I knew this was the right thing to do. This is what God and Jesus and everybody told us we have to do, and this is how it's all set up. So I never questioned it. When I went away to college eventually, Colby College in Maine in the early 70s, it was during the Vietnam War era, I started questioning things more. I didn't like the war. I didn't like all the stuff going on politically. So I started questioning things, but I really went into religion, and I started really studying the Bible and what Jesus said and what he really meant by that. I started doing yoga. I started meditating. I started reading books on Zen and other books from the East as well. I was really curious, like, what's the heck going on here? And right after college, I decided to leave home. Instead of taking over my father's newspaper business, my brother and I left home and we decided we were going to walk all the way to California with no money and just do a spiritual pilgrimage and meditate and live a life of meditation. So we did. We left home. Remember had my father's and mother's blessing, and we left home and we walked west, and we walked quite a while. After a few months, we'd gotten as far as Buffalo, New York. And in Buffalo, it was autumn, it was getting cold, and we thought, well, let's head south. So we actually walked south all the way to Alabama. And every day we'd walk maybe 25 miles and we would meditate, and we were eating whatever we could. We didn't have any money, so whatever, somehow we managed to survive. We did dumpster diving. We got gardens. We stayed in rescue missions, and we stayed in jails. We stayed with people's houses. All kinds of things happened. It was really an amazing adventure. And we stayed in hippie communes sometimes. And at one point, when we got to Tennessee, this was the time of hippie communes, and we stayed in the largest hippie commune in the world. It was called The Farm. It was about almost 1,000 people, and they were pretty much all from California. So we thought, oh, good, we kind of met in the middle here. And but they were all vegetarians. They had like 900 people that were vegetarians. About 200 of them were children, and they were all, and the children were, and actually, I have to say, they were not merely vegetarians. They were vegans. I mean, vegan means not eating meat or dairy or eggs and doing it for ethical reasons. So they were actually vegans, but they didn't say that because no one heard of that word. It was like an unknown word back in 1975. They said, well, we're vegetarians. And I asked them why they were doing it. And they told me there's two main reasons. One is most of the food that we're growing on this earth, instead of feeding it to people who are hungry, we're feeding it to these animals who are imprisoned, and it's incredibly inefficient. It takes huge amounts of corn and soy and alfalfa to feed these cows and pigs and chickens, and they turn it mostly into saturated fat and cholesterol and acidifying and inflammatory animal protein and huge amounts of sewage. So people in other parts of the world are starving. They can't get enough food because the people that are wealthy, are buying most of the grain and feeding it to their animals and getting diseases that come from eating all this rich food. And then the other people in the world don't have enough to eat. And the food shortages are the main cause of war and conflict in the world. So they said, we're eating lower on the food chain, so there's enough for everybody to eat. And I thought, wow, that's so noble and what a great idea. All right. And then the guy said, there's another reason too. Do you know what the animals go through? And he kind of explained to me the typical procedures that are used on most factory farms, and the mutilation and the hyper confinement and the impregnating them on what they call rape racks, stealing the babies, killing the babies. This massive ocean of misery and violence that people are actually causing when they take out their wallets and pay for this. And then they don't just cause it, then they turn around and actually eat it. They're eating violence and terror and fear and pain and despair. I thought, man, I don't want to be part of that. So I think the best thing about it for me was that I had this living example of 900 people, and we were all eating meals of beans and vegetables. It was called the farm. We grew a lot of the food right there. So that was it. It was easy. I became a vegetarian in 1975. I never have eaten meat in my life since 1975. And a few years later, I did end up in California. I was living at these meditation centers, a Zen center and a Tibetan Buddhist center. And I learned more about the basic, terrible, really, situation for hens and for cows, for dairy and egg production. So I became a vegan in 1980. So that's now 41 years ago. I have not eaten any meat, dairy, eggs of any kind in 41 years. So here I am, almost 70 years old. And I have to say, I didn't do it for my health, but man, it's been great for my health. I have not been to a doctor in 50 years. I have not had health insurance in 50 years. I haven't been to a drugstore for anything in 50 years. I mean, since I was 18 years old, um, I've just stayed out of the whole system. I don't get sick. I mean, it's been the greatest thing for my health. But I only eat whole, organic, plant-based foods. I get a lot of exercise. I do a lot of meditation, and I take really good care of my health. I know how to take care of one's health very well. So that's been helpful. But I think the foundation of it actually has been compassion for animals. I think the best way to be happy and healthy is to be kind and loving to others. That's the foundation of everything. It's the golden rule. I mean, the underlying teaching. I used to teach world religion, and the underlying teaching of all the world religions, it's the same thing. You can distill it down into one sentence, which is whatever you most want for yourself, give that to others, right? So if we want to be healthy, then let others be healthy. How can we be healthy if we're forcing billions of cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and all these other animals into extreme disease and toxicity and misery, cancer, obesity, heart disease? That's what these animals are experiencing. We force, there's over 10,000 drugs and hormones. They're forcibly injected with medications against their will. 90% of the antibiotics are just dumped into their feed to keep them alive and to make them get fat. We force them into extreme disease. And then of course, the main teaching in all the world religions, it's all the same teaching. It's whatever you sow, so shall you reap. I call it in the World Peace Diet the boomerang effect. If we're going to insist on imprisoning animals, how are we going to be really free? If we're going to insist on making animals sick, how are we going to really be healthy? If we're going to insist on breaking up their families, what's going to happen to our families? All the things we do to these animals, we don't care about their happiness or welfare. We see them as mere objects. So we reduce them to commodities. And we find a lot of people saying, gosh, I just feel like a commodity in a heartless economic system, just like they are. So whatever we sow, we reap. This is the main takeaway of this entire lecture, I think, really, that what we do to animals, we reap in our human lives. Exactly. I have a whole chapter in the World Peace Diet that goes into this in depth. But it's not our fault. It's not like we're bad people. And nobody gets up in the morning and thinks, oh, I just want to make a chicken suffer. I'm going to go buy Kentucky Fried Chicken and buy a chicken sandwich so I can make a chicken suffer. We don't think of that. We're just clueless, right? We just think, well, gosh, I got to eat something. So I need to get my protein. So we're just wounded by being born into a society where everything is hidden. And there are very powerful forces, financial and political forces. I call it the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex. Right? We have a lot of forces that get very wealthy on this system. There's a lot of people that get rich on wars, right? We know that. That's pretty obvious. A lot of people get rich on disease. They haven't made any money on me in 50 years, right? I mean, it would be a disaster for the pharmaceutical medical industry if everybody was a whole food, organic vegan like me and never got sick and never went to the drugstore. I haven't bought Rolaids, Right Guard, I don't know what they have there, aspirin, Tylenol, Tums, Viagra, whatever. I mean, I haven't needed any of that stuff. So the whole idea is that there's no money in healthy people. There's only money in sick people. There's no money in people who are conscious and aware and making connections. There's a lot of money to be made on people who are unconscious and unaware and addicted to consuming and buying things that are harmful to them and to the earth. There's a lot of money in that, right? And this is what Jesus said. I mean, this is what all these great teachers said. They didn't say, go along with the government, do whatever they say. They said, find out for yourself what the truth is. And go into the closet and pray, right? To go into the inner silence. So just to finish up the story, after going vegan in 1980, a few years later, I shaved my head and became a Buddhist monk. So there I was. I went over to South Korea. I was living in a Zen Buddhist monastery in South Korea, and we were meditating a lot. I mean, I had already been doing a lot of meditation, but this was very intense. It was from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. Every day we just sat in meditation, in silence on the floor. And it was rigorous, but it was very liberating for me because I think just the opportunity to spend literally thousands of hours sitting in silence in a supportive environment, questioning who I am. What is my true nature? What is the source of what I am? Find out directly. How many people in this world know the answer to that question? The most basic question there possibly could be. What are you? Who are you? What is the source of what you are? We don't know. The average person has no idea what they are. We think we're just a physical body walking around with a name attached to us, and that we're supposed to just follow orders and do what we're told until somehow we die. We don't know what dying is. We don't know what birth is. We don't know anything. Science doesn't tell us anything. Science blinds us to all of this. Science doesn't want us to even talk about this or even think about this. Science has got nothing to do with anything except the material world. And so we've created whole systems to dumb us down and disconnect us from our true nature. And that's what animal agriculture does. That's the whole point, is that animal agriculture is the foundation of our society. But we don't realize it. It took me decades to figure that basic thing out, that the fundamental activity of our society is herding animals. We look at other societies, like you go back 5,000 or 10,000 years and you see people walking around with sheep and goats and herding them. Well, we can say that's a herding society. And we can see what happened in those herding societies. And I write about that in the World Peace Diet, how these societies evolved and how they became very violent. The most warlike societies the world has ever seen are these herding cultures. But we are also a herding culture today. It's just that now it's all computerized and industrialized. The animals are confined in these stinking sheds where you never see them. And it only takes a few people to do it. But the biggest thing we're doing is herding animals. Millions, billions of animals are being herded. When we lived in an RV and traveled around North America, and we saw these vast fields of genetically engineered corn and soy and alfalfa and wheat and oats, all that. Most of that, 90% of all that is not going to people. It's going to these imprisoned animals. You never see them. They're stuck away in these little sheds. So it's all invisible. But when the thing that's really interesting to understand is if you go back 10,000 years and really study the history of our society, you realize that 10,000 years ago was the very first time that anyone ever herded animals. That had never happened until 10,000 years ago in what is today Iraq. The middle, what we call Iraq today, the Middle East. It's the Levant area, the eastern Levant. Anyway, these people started to own. These are they were wild sheep. These are our sheep. We own them. They're our property. So they started to own them and confine them. And then wild goats, and then later, about 2,000 years later, wild cows. So this gradually spread, this idea of owning animals, not just hunting them, but owning them. This was the greatest revolution our society has ever seen, and no one talks about it. All the other revolutions, they're nothing compared to this one. This transformed everything, and there's about 6 main things that happened. Number one, animals were reduced to being mere property or to being a nuisance. They're going to interfere with their pests. So the whole natural world was reduced to being something that we have to either dominate and control and exploit or be afraid of. Oh, we're terrified. Really, most people are really afraid of nature. We're afraid of germs. We're afraid of everything because we're disconnected from nature because we're doing animal agriculture, which is the most unnatural, demonic activity anyone can engage in when you really think about it. To enslave an animal from birth for the only purpose to kill them. For what reason? See, I'm not the only one. I've lived my entire life, and that's the great good news underlying everything is that there are no nutrients that we have to actually imprison animals in order to get, right? I mean, there aren't any nutrients like that. So we can get all of our nutrients from plants. If it's in an animal, whatever it is, vitamins, minerals, whatever it is, it came from plants originally. So we can get the nutrients we need from plants. But these people back then, for whatever reason, and we don't know why, anthropologists argue about it, some kind of reason, they started herding animals. And that led to like I say, the reduction of animals. It led to for the very first time, to a wealthy elite class. There had never been this wealthy elite class with all the money and all the power to dominate everybody else. That had never happened. But once you start herding animals for a while, gradually, it took centuries. It took actually quite a few centuries, even millennia. But gradually, by the time the very oldest writings come, which was about 3,500, 4,000 years ago, we have these ancient writings. I used to teach college courses in these ancient texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the ancient Old Testament books. Just read those. There's the kings, right? The kings are now established. Who are the kings? They're the herders. The only reason they're kings, the only reason they're powerful and wealthy is because they own the most livestock. So livestock are not just animals, they're wealth. The more livestock you own, the wealthier you are. They're more valuable than gold and silver because you can eat them, but they need land, they need water. So animal agriculture led to the arising of a wealthy elite class and to the creation of the two primary institutions that animal agriculture creates, which are number one, slavery, and number two, war. War and slavery go hand in hand with animal agriculture. The oldest word in the world for war is the ancient word, Sanskrit word, gavya, which means the desire for more cows. Because these kings, if they were going to own livestock, they needed land, and so they were fighting with each other. They started these huge wars with each other over land and over livestock. And if they could win a war, they would get all that livestock, all that wealth for themselves, and the land for that livestock. So this led to a warlike society. And whoever lost the war, not only did the animals become the literal property of the victors, but the human beings became the property of the victors. It's a small step from doing to animals to then doing it to human beings. So we had, for the first time, people owning other human beings like chattel property. In fact, that's what happened with time. And then women. That was the next thing that happened, was that women's status was just crushed because women up until that time were respected, basically, because they did something men can never do, which is to bring forth new life. But with animal agriculture, that's just breeding. You just impregnate them, you steal their babies. That's what they're for. That's their purpose. Their purpose is to be a breeder. So women, by the time the historic period emerged, and you can read about it in these ancient texts, women are bought and sold like chattel property, like livestock, because they're owned like livestock, because that's what animal agriculture does. It reduces the sacred feminine dimension of life. And the core of spirituality, in many ways, is the sacred feminine, the capacity to be receptive. And we can't be receptive if we're doing animal agriculture because we don't want to think about what we're actually doing to these animals. How would we like it to be raised in slavery from the time we're born? How would we like it to be impregnated on a rape rack over and over again and have our babies stolen and our milk stolen and our lives stolen and our purposes stolen? We don't want to think about that. So we don't think about it. So we learn as a whole society to stay very shallow and to be materialistic and to be outward oriented and dominating and domineering. And then boys, of course, girls are harmed by this because they're reduced to mere breeders and to being a physical object for the sexual use of males. But also boys are harmed because boys have to basically suppress their natural sensitivity and kindness and gentleness and tenderness to be hard and tough and disconnected and capable of violence toward animals and toward rival herders. So this hard, tough, disconnected male is intimately connected with animal agriculture. And it's one of the most devastating forces on planet Earth. And you can't, and the thing to understand is you cannot have animal agriculture without this. You can't, because these animals have interests that are to them as important as my interests are to me. Anyone who's had a companion animal, you understand what I'm talking about. You know, there's, when you look into the eyes of a dog or a cat or a little being, there's someone in there looking out back at you, and maybe they don't speak your language, maybe they don't read the newspaper, maybe they don't vote, but they have interests and they have feelings and they're capable of suffering, and they have interests that are as important to them as our interests are to us. But we live in a society where we're taught to disconnect from that. So the last thing in the world I want to do is blame anyone for anything. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying all of us have been wounded by being raised in a society with 10,000 years of a history of herding animals and reducing beings to things and creating a wealthy elite that owns and runs the government, the media, corporations, the financial institutions, the educational institutions, the religious institutions. And we are raised in that, and we're taught from the time we're little infants to merely participate and also to go along with it and to go out and take out our wallet and pay for meat, dairy products, and eggs and to exploit animals. And so if we're exploiting animals, what's happening to us? We're being exploited. Anyone who's eating animal foods is being exploited. As soon as we exploit others, as we sow, so shall we reap. The hospitals are filled with people who are there because they have diabetes and heart disease and liver disease and kidney disease and arthritis and osteoporosis and all kinds of mental problems and things that come from diets that are high in animal-based foods, which are filled with toxins. Animal-based foods concentrate toxins, not just the heavy metals and the PCBs and the dioxins and the nuclear radiation that are in the oceans. These animals are eating huge amounts of fish. You know, they're eating all this stuff that concentrates toxins. And pesticide residues, all these things create cancer. I mean, these are huge industries of tremendous profit and money. And with all the money that the pharmaceutical industry gets, they can easily control the narrative and control the media and really control the educational system so that we continue to eat these foods. And no one can question that. And the doctors, they don't know anything about this. They're taught in medical school, don't think about the diet. Just tell them they can always come and get a drug for whatever problem they have. So we're disempowered that way. And again, it's in a way, it's not our fault. We're educated in this way, and it's done on purpose. But the spiritual traditions, one of the things I love is traveling to other countries and seeing how these other religions encourage people. Like you have religions in India, for example, where they say you really shouldn't go to a doctor. You know, try to heal it spiritually. Try to get in alignment with God, or get in alignment with the truth that you are, and then you will find healing. As long as you're not in alignment with your divine purpose, you're going to have some kind of a disease. It'll manifest. So if you go to a doctor and just get a drug and to get rid of the symptoms, you have the underlying spiritual disease is never addressed. And this is the fundamental teaching in Taoism. Jainism has the teaching of ahimsa, which means nonviolence, to just don't commit violence to other beings. This is a fundamental teaching in virtually all the world religions. So the good news, I guess, underlying all of this is that we do have these wonderful ancient wisdom teachings that point us in the direction of authentic spirituality, of compassion for animals, and especially, I think, for compassion for animals in the Eastern traditions, because the Eastern religions are products of societies that were less dominated by herding. The Western religions, the three main Western religions, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, those three religions are the product of herding cultures. These cultures have a heavy-duty herding mentality. So it's very difficult, even if the great spiritual founders of these religions were preaching compassion and kindness to animals, it's going to get sifted out. It's going to kind of be like, well, don't worry about that. You can have your meat, no problem. Whereas in Asia, the herding was less pronounced. People were more eating plant-based foods. And so you can actually read in the religious texts and in the practices of these people much stronger prohibitions against killing animals. They really make a big deal about it. And they don't just say, thou shalt not kill. That only apply, like, for example, in the West, that usually people say, well, thou shalt not kill. That only applies to humans. You can kill cows and pigs. That's okay. But in Asia, you know, in Buddhism or Jainism, and most in many forms of Hinduism and other Confucianism and other traditions, it's all sentient beings. You don't kill animals. You even try not to kill insects. I mean, you try to really not kill as much as possible. Don't kill, don't harm, don't steal, don't abuse other living beings. That's a basic thing. If they're capable of suffering, be nice. You know, be kind to them. That's the best. That's a fundamental spiritual teaching. So for me, it's been very illuminating. Like when I went to China, you know, my flight was paid for, and I was, you know, everything was paid for by the Buddhists, right? I mean, they loved it that I was coming and promoting veganism in China to the lay people, because that's part of their teaching of compassion for all living beings. Wouldn't it be great for me to get paid by the Christians to go around preaching veganism? You know, why don't they do it? That's the teaching. I mean, compassion and kindness for other beings. So I think, you know, it's just an interesting question to see how we respond. I think that's the main question: how we respond to the situation that we're in today, and how we respond to the basic fact that if other living beings are capable of suffering, you know, how do we respond to that? So I've used up my time here. I think I could talk a lot longer, but I'll stop here. The World Peace Diet, the book I wrote, I have an audiobook version, and it's me reading it very quickly, and it's 13 and a half hours long, right? So I can go 13 and a half hours, but I won't. I'll stop here. And because, you know, as a vegan, I believe in compassion for all living beings, and I know it's after a while it gets tired to hear someone talking on and on. So I'd like to stop here, but I would like to I'll see if you have any questions or any comments or whatever about what I've been saying. But the main idea is I'm happy to really address any aspect of this. I didn't get too much into the environmental part, just to say it's very wasteful. So the main problems we're having with soil erosion, water depletion, climate destabilization, and pretty much everything, the rainforest destruction, species extinction, it's all animal agriculture. I mean, animal agriculture destroys habitat. And if we move, let's close with this idea. The good news is, as we human beings awaken out of animal agriculture and move to a plant-based way of eating and living, we will unleash incredible forces for healing. Our physical bodies, our earth, our society, our psyches, our spiritual connection to the infinite benevolent source of all life, all of it. But as long as we are going to insist on imprisoning and abusing animals completely unnecessarily, there's no nutrients we need to be healthy to do that, we're going to keep sowing what we're reaping. And the problem is we don't even realize why. We don't know why we have wars, why we have outbreaks of disease, why we have social injustice. What's the problem? We think we're some kind of terrible species that's just got violence in us. It's not. It's just we've been born into a society with an obsolete food orientation. That's it. It's just we're born into a herding culture. For some reason, 10,000 years ago, people thought they had to imprison animals and kill them and breed them to get enough to eat. We don't have to do that anymore. We can stop that. If we, it's not, we're not evil. We're beautiful, loving expressions of divine love and light and awareness. That's what human beings are. We're just born into a society with this obsolete food system. We're eating violence. We're causing violence. We don't want to think about it. We're traumatized by it. When people are traumatized by something, they don't want to talk about it. You are very courageous to stay here while I said all this and to face the trauma, really, of this. That the animals have to face it every day. But for us to look at that and realize we can transform our world by merely understanding the food and changing our relationship with animals and food to be one of kindness and love and caring and health. And there's nothing stopping us. That's the beautiful thing. There's not anything stopping. Anyone can do it right now. Anyone can do it. And our entire planet right now, tomorrow, could be vegan. There's nothing stopping us. It's just a matter of fear. If we're afraid, I don't know what. I mean, there's nothing to be afraid of. The food gets better every day, and everything gets better every day. I always say the smartest thing I ever did, besides marrying my wonderful wife Madeline, was going vegan. I mean, you can't do a smarter thing for your health and for the health of all of us, because we're all interconnected. And that's the basic thing. Our welfare is interconnected. The more we bless others, the more we're blessed. And that's the beautiful truth underlying all the spiritual traditions agree that we're not a fundamentally separate self, that we are interconnected. All right, so that's my words for the moment, and I'm happy again to respond to any comments or questions anyone has. If you don't have any, that's fine too.
I actually Hi, Dr. Tuttle. I put a question in the chat. The first one you can ignore, but the second one was a refinement of the first.
Just
So,
tell me what it is. I can't read it. What is it? I mean, I could
okay.
bother with it.
Yeah, so it's in the chat, but I was just asking, so at this stage in my life, I am looking to further my spiritual, worldly, and universal knowledge and grow my religious and spiritual wisdom. But I'm still young, so I don't have as much. But since a lot of your topics have been rooted in a spiritual base, I was wondering if you had anything to recommend or advise to young adults like me in college or any other people facing this type of situation.
When you say some advice for you for young people, do you mean books to read or experiences to
Um,
have? Or I'm just
I
curious,
think,
like,
yeah, I think a blend of a lot of things, experiences or books as well, or just different practices that you have integrated into your life that you think would help people step into that new journey.
well, yeah, thank you, Alexander. That really is a very quite profound question you're asking, and I guess all of us, speak from our own experience, and so my experience was when I was young, and maybe your age. I don't know exactly how old you are, but when I was like in my late teens, early 20s, and going through, and then mid 20s, and all that, I went through really profound disenchantment with the world that I saw around me, which was painful at the time, to just question everything. So I wouldn't I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but in a way I wouldn't take it away from anybody either. I mean, it's a healthy thing to question everything. Whatever I was raised in the media, so I learned growing up that you don't run any article in the newspaper that the advertisers will object to. You can't do it. They'll pull their ads and you'll go out of business. So the newspaper, the radio, the television, all of it is supported by advertisers. So everything we're learning from the media, it's all lies for the most part. I mean, it's a narrative that's constructed by the big corporations in order to keep people enslaved. So so what I started doing was questioning. I started questioning things and getting very angry and upset about how much lies and deception was everywhere. And then I started searching for the truth, right? Okay, I want to find the truth. And so I was drawn into the great wisdom traditions because they're bottomless wells of wisdom. I mean, just incredibly rich. I can't even tell you how rich. I mean, I've only scratched the surface. I've read thousands of books and I've taught college courses and all this stuff. And I've written, PhD dissertations and lots of other things going into all this stuff. And I've only scratched the surface. I mean, the wisdom, for example, in the Buddhist tradition or the Hindu tradition or the Christian or all these traditions, if you go deep into the great lives of the mystics and saints and sages, what they discovered and how they lived their lives, and to get inspiration from their example, uh, it's man. I mean, books to me have been my greatest friends and allies. I'm so glad I was born and raised before computers when we really sat with a book and went out into the woods and read the book and practiced it. And I feel now I'm getting just bombarded with so much stuff. It's kind of hard, but for me, books were tremendously helpful. And I can't say someone should do what I did. I just found myself basically letting my intuition guide me, going into a bookstore and just browsing, just feeling what is it, who's the one I'm supposed to be reading right now, because I don't want to tell anybody else what they should do. But what I did was just try to feel into with my intuition. I think the greatest gift we have is our intuition. We have these two capacities. We have this analytical, logical, rational, intellectual capacity, which our society sort of puts up on a pedestal, but then tears it down all the time too. I mean, oh. But we have intuition, which is not even recognized, and that is our great gift. It's our inner wisdom that can actually speak to us from a higher level, our true nature speaking to us. And so, if you have a hunch about something, you have an inner feeling, follow where that leads. And one of the main things I realized early on was the importance of meditation. And I'm so glad I did. I started, it wasn't easy in the beginning. You know, I would sit and my mind was just flying, bouncing off the walls. You know, it was ridiculous. But everything I read said that the royal road to happiness and freedom and awakening is working with your own mind. Work with your own mind. You know, however you want to do that. Some people say prayer, some people say meditation. For me, I use the word meditation because it basically refers to something that I think is a natural human activity, which is to be totally present and aware without the mind thinking and interpreting and either praising, blaming, judging, accusing, shaming, running a whole story, right? To just be conscious and aware. I mean, it's very hard to do. To be like, I would just practice watching my breath, watching the flow of breathing. I've done so many different practices, but basically the liberation of that. Because what I did when I really got into meditation, I was meditating 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, times in my life. Long retreats. I did 10-day retreats, 50-day retreats, 90-day retreats. I mean, I really did a lot of meditation. I realized at a core level that my mind had been colonized. When a European country would go into Africa or Asia somewhere, they would colonize. They would basically tell the local people, get rid of everything you think, this is how it should be. I realized I was born and my mind had been taken over by a program, by a colonization program. And when I could just sit quietly and unravel that and just watch it. So I think if you can I know you're busy, everybody's busy nowadays, but if you can take a half an hour every day and just listen and just watch your mind, become friends with your mind. And I spend 2 hours a day, the first thing I get up in the morning, that's my meditation time. So I think to just listen and create a foundation in your life where you're just listening for a while and be open, and then try to continue that throughout the day. And people have discovered, I mean, science has discovered, like when they study meditation, they found that even people who meditate and think they're not doing a good job, like their mind's wandering and whatever, it's not good, they found that it has very profoundly healing effects on them psychologically on many levels. So I really think that developing a rich inner life is the foundation for a happy outer world. There isn't any other way. You can't do it the other way around. We're taught in our society to change everything in the outer world and go out there and make the money and get the mate you want and make it happen. And maybe that works for some people, but I just never did it that way. I felt like I need to work on myself, and I have to say, an incredible, wonderful life. I mean, I married the most amazing being, and I wasn't even trying. I mean, everything. It's just I've never worked for money really. I mean, a little bit, but it's just miracles will happen. I used to say when my brother and I were on that walk, we didn't have any money, and we would sometimes, very often, we would sleep on the floor of churches, and sometimes they would say, "Could you come in and talk to the Sunday school kids? Tell them what you're doing," because we said, well, we're just walking in faith, and so I remember going in eastern Kentucky, we'd go in Appalachia, in these little haulers that people are living in shacks with dirt floors, we were sleeping with them on the dirt floor of their shack and for 8 kids or whatever. I mean, it was incredible experiences we had. But I remember just telling the people, listen, it's what Jesus said is true. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and everything else will take care of itself. Just go for the spiritual awakening. Make that the number one most important thing, and you'll figure it out. We all have a unique life path. No one can say what someone else should be doing. We all have our own unique puzzle to figure out, but that basic principle to shoot for the highest, because we're all going to leave this body, and at that point, it's the quality of our consciousness that matters. And what we can realize right now, is that what we are was never born and will never die, that what we are is eternal. and is infinite. And we're just functioning through a physical body. But this body is not what we are. And our society wants us to never be aware of that. Our society wants to imprison us in all kinds of, they really are prisons of money and relationship and power. So in order to escape that, we have to go in. We have to go within and understand our true nature. And I think there's no limit to the beauty and power and joy and freedom we can discover by working with our own mind. So any books that can help you, any experiences, like for me, living in a monastery, I mean, or in an intentional community like the farm, really incredible experiences. I was part of the Global Walk for a Livable World. We walked from Los Angeles to New York City for the environment back in 1990. You know, as a community of 100 people walking across the whole country. That was an amazing experience. You know, traveling is great. I mean, going into other countries and seeing people that live with completely different sets of narratives about reality. I mean, we get so stuck in a prison. So I think you know, find your own unique way and realize that the greatest education we can get is really comes from within. But there's lots of wonderful people out there that can help us. I think I've had the greatest teachers, and that's why I feel such an obligation to try to share what I've learned with others, because I've had some amazing teachers from so many different, you know, experiences. Zen Buddhist teachers, I mean, great enlightened masters. I've been able, really, I mean, if you, whatever you put your mind on, it'll happen. I mean, that's the amazing thing. When you put your attention on, it'll show up. So just hold a vision and it'll happen. It's really fantastic how that happens. I've seen that over and over again. Thank you for, I
Thank you
don't
so
want to
much.
actually talk too long, but
Thank you for your response. I really
yeah.
appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Yeah. All right. Well, it's been an hour. Do we have any other pressing questions anyone like to address? I'm happy to. Also, you can go to our website. I just mentioned that worldpeacediet.com or my name, willtuttle.com. There's our lecture schedule, articles I've written, the books, CDs, music, videos, Madeline's cooking videos, our trainings. We have an online training if you want to go deeper into all this. So we have lots of resources there also. Okay, someone's raising your. Are you raising your hand? Is it Fatima?
Yeah. Just I have a comment, not a question.
Yes.
It's thank you so much. It's very nice session. Spirituality and compassion and a lot of things. And I agree with you about like in this country, you don't make money on health, you make money in sickness. So this is very true. Like people, they think like they can fix everything with the bills, with just go to the pharmacy and get whatever there for any reason. And they like, but with the thing about a lot of people, they are not aware of where the meat comes from. Like this is I think that this is the problem. Like recently I became a health and wellness coach, and I now I understand them, how the meat or the animals are treated, and the meat we get in the stores, how like the process they go through and everything. But a lot of people don't know. This is the awareness that we lack. They don't know. They just go and buy whatever meat, and
Right,
I
exactly.
don't know what we should do about like the whole society, like how the animals are treated, like until we get them in the stores. So
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, and it's great that you've sounds like you've made an effort to lift up the curtain a little bit. It's kind of like that Wizard of Oz, I say, you know,
yeah,
when
just
Toto
a little, not a lot,
curtain,
just a little.
yeah, right, a little. You pull back the curtain, and it's like, oh my God, now I
Yep.
understand what's going on here. And I've done it. You know, I have actually pulled back the curtain. I've been to slaughterhouses and factory farms and stockyards, and there's nothing worse. And my heart really goes out to these animals, but also to the workers. You know, these workers have to do the worst work. I mean, they have to stab animals all day. There's no worse work, or impregnate them, or cut up their bodies. I mean, it's all most hideous. And these workers have the highest rates of suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, spousal abuse, because they just do violence all day. They have really what's called perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder from just engaging in horrific violence day after day. I mean, it's the darkest, most hellish, it's literal hells on earth, of misery and horrible violence that go on to these animals. And the fact that we're actually eating that. Of course, we don't want to know about it. Of course, it's covered up. And there's two reasons it's covered up. It's covered up by the people themselves, right? The average human being. If I say to the average person, at a cookout, would you like to know where your hot dog came from?
Mm.
They'll say, no, 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 no. I want to enjoy my hot dog. I don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me. Don't tell me. They
Yeah.
maybe laugh, don't tell me. I don't want to know. So people don't want to know. It's understandable. We are naturally empathetic. We're naturally compassionate. It
Mm.
would disturb us to know, so we
Yeah.
don't want to know. So that's one reason. And the other reason, of course, is that the very most powerful forces on earth, the pharmaceutical industry, the big food industry, the big chemical industries, all these industries, the petroleum industry, the banks, they don't want anybody to know. That's how they make their money.
Mm.
If people knew and they stopped buying all the meat and didn't get sick and didn't have wars, these wealthy people wouldn't have the source of their wealth. So there's a lot of cover up. It's a big cover up. It's
Yeah.
deception. Deception is the basic foundation of society. Our society is based on lies. Everything is a lie. Every deception. I'm telling you. I mean, if you go deep enough, whatever you think, it's probably the opposite. And so that's being actually promoted by our society. So I think, and that's really what most great spiritual teachers have said. That, I mean, it's nothing new under the sun. This is how it's been for a
Yeah.
long time. But now, I think now it's a critical time, because with the technology that we have, with almost 8 billion people, we really need to become more truthful. And I think there is a spiritual evolution perhaps happening in humanity. People are waking up. There's a
Mm.
very positive movement happening, I think, at a deep level in human consciousness. And more people are realizing that they don't want to cause suffering to others.
Yeah.
They want to take responsibility for their health, and take responsibility for their relationships, and take responsibility for their spirituality, take responsibility for the government, and try to really live a life in alignment with spiritual values and with health. So I think it's great that you're a health coach. You can help people. And the other good thing now is that there are videos you can watch, of undercover videos of what happens
Yeah.
in laboratories and on factory farms and places where animals are abused. And just watch a few of those. Boy, that'll open your eyes a little bit. I mean, just to actually go to them and smell it, it's really much worse. But just to see it
Mm.
it can be helpful. I think I still watch these videos from time to time, just to remind myself of what these poor animals have to go through, and it keeps
Mm.
me motivated in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you. But I would also say, and in closing here, that I think it's really important for all of us to cultivate love in all our relationships, with not just with animals, but with human animals, with the other human beings, and not to blame people or to criticize them or shame them, because people really are doing the best that they can in the situation. We've all been wounded, and to just be an example, to be a positive example ourselves, and plant seeds with love. Just the basic thing. I think the best thing we can do in some ways is just tell our own story.
Mm.
And the underlying truth we all share is the same thing. If I say, I realized that the only reason I was eating animal foods all those years that I was doing it was I was just following orders. And then I realized, gosh, it's not a good idea. There's a lot of suffering, a lot of disease actually in that. So I'm not doing it anymore, and it's fantastic. And then don't say anything else. You don't have to argue with people. You don't have to blame them, anything. Just tell your story that I discovered I was just eating animal foods because I was following orders, and I realized it wasn't a good idea, so I'm not doing it, and it's great. That's it. Because everyone's in the same boat. The only reason anyone eats animal foods is because they're just following orders. And
Mm.
everybody, I think, knows deep down it's really not a good idea. So when you show that you figured it out, and it's great, and then you don't say anything more, don't try to change them, because the basic thing is, if I come along and I'm trying to change people, they're going to resist. That's healthy. If someone came up to me and tried to change me, I'd fight back. Don't try to change me, leave me alone. So don't. If the irony is, the more I try to change people, the more they resist, and I don't get anywhere. The more I don't try to change them, and just live a life as a kind and loving example, like Jesus said, like all the great people said, then people change. They're attracted. They think, wow, whatever you have, that looks kind of interesting. I'm going to try that out. And they come to it on their own. So they're motivated. They're not being pushed into it. I think this is the real way to spread any kind of gospel, any kind of good news, is to be an example and do it with love, and don't try to change people. That never goes anywhere. Don't blame them, don't shame them, don't criticize, just be loving. That's the essence of veganism. It's the essence of all the world religions. It's the same thing. Just live a life of loving kindness and inclusiveness, and you'll be healthy, and you'll help the world be healthy. And when you're doing that, you're planting seeds. And we're all, as I say, we're all going to pass away. But at that moment when we pass, when we leave our body, we'll have a good feeling in our heart that we did our best to be a force for kindness and love in this world for the short time we're here. I don't think anyone can do better than that. Just to live what the great spiritual teachers said, to live it, not just preach it, but live it. It's much harder to live it than it is to preach it. Live it in the little daily interactions we have with the people in our lives. To live that, and to find out and deeper who we really are. That makes it easier. So thank you all so much for joining us. I think we've gone maybe long enough. What do you think, Jessica? We're about at a good time maybe to wrap it up.
We're a little over time, actually.
A little
So
overtime. Okay.
yeah, which has been great. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who is here in the Zoom, and thanks to everybody watching on Facebook and on YouTube.
Yes. Thank you all so much. Go forth and multiply the message. Thank you very much. Much love
Thank
to you
you.
all. All
Yes.
right. Thanks.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.